My phone rang at 2:47 p.m. on May 15th. I know the exact time because I was checking the clock constantly that day. I was standing in my dorm room at university, wearing the graduation gown they'd mailed me 3 weeks earlier. I'd hung it on the back of my door, and every time I looked at it, I felt this strange mix of pride and anxiety. Pride because I was actually graduating. Me, Sarah, the girl who used to cry over algebra homework in 10th grade. Anxiety because I didn't know if my parents were going to show up. I should have known something was wrong when they didn't call that morning like they usually did. My mom always called on important days. She'd call to say, "Good luck on your test," or "Hope your presentation goes well." But that morning, nothing. By noon, I was starting to feel this knot in my stomach. That's when I texted my dad asking what time they'd arrive. He said he'd call me later. That later came at 2:47 p.m. "Honey, I'm so sorry," my mom said the moment I answered. I could hear it in her voice immediately, the apology that comes before bad news. "We can't make it today. I'm so sorry." I stood there holding my phone to my ear, wearing that graduation gown, in a room with my 2 roommates who were waiting to take photos with me before the ceremony, and I heard my mother tell me that they weren't coming, not because they had to work, not because there was an emergency with the house or the car, but because my sister needed them. My sister, Emma, 3 years younger than me, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Well, until that week, when everything she'd built started to crumble. "Your sister's boyfriend broke up with her," my mom continued, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. "He left her completely blindsided. She's devastated, Sarah. She's not eating. She's barely left her bed. Your dad and I think we need to be here with her today. She needs us right now." I didn't cry. I remember being surprised by that. I thought I would cry, but instead, I just felt numb, cold, like someone had reached into my chest and pulled out something important, and I was standing there watching it happen, but couldn't do anything to stop it. "Okay," I said quietly. "We're so sorry, baby. We're so proud of you. This isn't about you. You know that, right? You're amazing. You're going to graduate with honors, and you're going to have the most incredible future. But Emma is going through something really hard right now." Do you know what the worst part about that moment was? It wasn't the anger. It wasn't even the disappointment. It was the automatic way I went into comfort mode. I found myself reassuring my mother. Me, the one being left behind. I was telling her that it was okay, that I understood, that Emma must really be hurting, because that's who I was back then. That's who they'd raised me to be. The responsible one, the understanding one, the daughter who never caused problems, who always put everyone else first, who could be counted on to handle her own disappointment gracefully. "You'll be fine, Sarah," my dad said when he got on the phone. "You're strong. You're the strongest person we know. Emma's more fragile. She needs us today. But you're going to do amazing things with your life. We believe in you." And that was supposed to make it better. That was supposed to be the consolation prize. "You're so strong, so you don't need us. Your sister is weak, so we have to be there for her." After we hung up, I sat on my bed for a while. My roommate Jessica came over and sat next to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just sat there. Then she said, "That's bullshit." It was bullshit. But I still marched into that graduation ceremony 2 hours later. I still walked across that stage and accepted my diploma. I still smiled for the camera when Jessica's mom took photos of me in that cap and gown, alone, without my parents on either side of me like I'd imagined 1,000 times. But something shifted that day. Something inside me that I didn't fully understand yet. A crack in the foundation of how I saw myself, my family, and what I owed to people who didn't always show up for me. This is the story of what happened after that day. This is the story of what I learned about myself when I realized that being strong didn't mean I had to accept being overlooked. This is the story of how my parents' choice to skip my graduation turned into the catalyst for the most important journey of my life. To understand why that phone call hurt so much, you have to understand the landscape I was navigating. I didn't just wake up one day being the responsible, self-sufficient daughter. That role was created over years, through 1,000 small moments that taught me exactly where I stood in my family hierarchy. I was born when my parents were young and terrified. My dad was 24, fresh out of college with a degree in business that he didn't know what to do with. My mom was 22, and she'd dropped out of college to be with him because she was in love. They were happy, but they were also completely unprepared for parenthood. I have a photo from when I was 3 months old. My mom's holding me, and there's this look of pure panic on her face, like she's asking, "Why did we think we could do this?" They figured it out, though, slowly. My dad started working at his cousin's accounting firm. My mom got a job at a doctor's office. We lived in a small apartment in the suburbs. My childhood was normal, not wealthy, not struggling, just normal. I had toys and books and a loving mother who read to me every night. My dad came home from work tired but present. We had family dinners. I felt secure. Then Emma was born when I was 4 years old. I don't remember being jealous or upset about having a little sister. I remember being excited. I remember my mom telling me that I was going to be a big helper, and that idea made me feel important. I was going to be responsible for something. I was going to have a purpose, and I was good at it. Really good. While other 4-year-olds were demanding attention and acting out because they weren't the center of the universe anymore, I was fetching diapers and holding Emma's bottle. I was her little protector. I loved her fiercely, and my parents praised me for it constantly. "Sarah, you're such a good big sister," my mom would say. "Not all older siblings are as patient as you are." "We're so lucky to have you," my dad would tell me. "Emma is lucky to have you." And there it was, buried in the praise, the implication that my value came from what I could do for other people, that my worth was tied to my usefulness, that love was something I had to earn through service. As I got older, this pattern became more and more entrenched. Emma was the beautiful one. She had these huge brown eyes and golden curly hair, and strangers would stop my parents on the street to comment on how pretty she was. I was pretty too, in a different way, but nobody stopped to tell us that. Nobody oohed and awed. I was competent. I was helpful. I was reliable. In school, I was a good student. Not the top of my class, but solidly in the top 10%. Emma, on the other hand, was naturally gifted. Teachers said she was the most talented student they'd taught in years. By middle school, she was doing advanced placement classes and winning academic competitions. Here's the thing about having a naturally gifted sibling. You learn very quickly what you are and are not. I was not the smart one. Emma was the smart one. So what was I? I was the hardworking one, the practical one, the one who didn't need as much attention because she was fine on her own. When I was 13 and Emma was 9, my parents went through a rough patch. I didn't understand it at the time, but I understand it now. My dad had been passed over for a promotion at his firm. My mom was struggling with depression but didn't know how to talk about it. Money was tight. The house felt tense all the time. I remember my mom crying in the kitchen at night when she thought I was asleep. I remember my dad working later and later, coming home angry and exhausted. And I remember making a very conscious decision. I was going to be easy. I was not going to add to their stress. I was going to take care of Emma, and I was going to take care of the house, and I was going to be the stable thing in this unstable situation. Emma, bless her heart, didn't have the same self-awareness or the same inclination toward self-sacrifice. When our parents were fighting, she acted out. She had tantrums. She demanded attention. She cried and screamed and made it all about her pain, which from a child psychology perspective was completely healthy and appropriate. But from the perspective of a family in crisis, it meant she needed more. My parents rallied around her. They put her in therapy. They talked to her teachers. They spent extra time with her in the evenings, doing homework together and making sure she felt secure. And I made dinner. I did laundry. I helped Emma with her homework when my mom was too tired. I was the glue that held things together. By the time I was 16, I'd internalized the message so completely that I didn't even think about it anymore. I just naturally took on more responsibility. When my parents couldn't afford to send both of us to summer camp, I didn't go. Emma went, and I stayed home and worked a part-time job at the local grocery store so I could help with the mortgage. My parents felt guilty, but they also didn't really argue with it. I was capable. I was fine on my own. In high school, I was involved in everything: student council, debate team, volunteer work at the community center. I was building a resume even then, trying to make myself valuable through achievement, through being useful, through being the kind of daughter who didn't require as much emotional labor. Emma, meanwhile, continued to be the golden child, not because she was doing anything wrong, but because she was struggling more visibly. She had anxiety about her grades. She had social drama with friends. She needed emotional support and guidance and reassurance. Our parents gave her that abundantly. They gave her their time and their attention and their faith that she could overcome anything. I never resented her for it. That's the thing I want to be clear about. I didn't hate my sister. I loved her. But I also knew, with a certainty that I'd learned through years of subtle messaging, that I was not the one who needed taking care of. I was the caretaker. That was my identity. That was my place in the family. So when I got to college, I didn't struggle. I didn't reach out to my parents for help with homesickness or stress or relationship problems. I handled it. I worked 3 part-time jobs to help pay for my expenses, even though my parents were helping with tuition. I got good grades without asking for tutoring. I made friends without needing my mom to help me navigate social drama. I was the daughter who had it figured out. Emma, in the meantime, was living the college experience that I'd read about in books and seen in movies. She went to the big parties. She dated. She changed her major twice. She called our mom crying about her struggles with group projects and difficult professors. Our parents sent her care packages. They drove up to see her. They were involved in her life in a way that felt, from where I was sitting, deeply and utterly involved. And I told myself it was fine. I told myself that this was the natural order of things, that some people needed more support, and some people were just strong enough to stand on their own. I never questioned whether it was fair. I never asked myself whether I deserved the same kind of attention and investment. I just accepted it as fact. That was who I was when I walked across that graduation stage without my parents in the audience. The girl who'd been trained over 18 years to believe that her value came from her independence, that her strength was her defining characteristic, that needing her parents, or anyone, was a failure on her part. I was about to learn that this belief system was going to cost me far more than a few missing parents at my graduation. If you want to understand the full picture of what happened on my graduation day, you have to understand Emma. Not because I want to paint her as a villain, she isn't one, but because she was the fulcrum on which everything balanced, and her story is inseparable from mine. Emma was one of those people who seemed to have everything figured out. She was beautiful, she was smart, she was charismatic. In high school, she was homecoming queen. She had a serious boyfriend named Marcus, who was also popular and smart and seemed like the perfect match for her. When they went off to college, different schools, 2 hours apart, everyone assumed it would be fine. They were in love, they'd make it work. And for a while they did. I watched my sister's relationship unfold from a distance, the way you do as an older sibling. I saw her texts about the amazing time she had when Marcus visited. I heard her stories about how thoughtful he was, how he surprised her with flowers, how he was already talking about their future together. My mom ate it up. She loved Marcus. She talked about what beautiful grandbabies Emma and Marcus would have someday. She imagined their wedding. She told Emma how lucky she was to have found her soulmate at such a young age. Emma, for her part, seemed to genuinely believe it. She was planning her life around Marcus. She talked about going to the same graduate school he was interested in. She turned down an amazing internship opportunity in another state because it would have meant being away from him for the summer. She was, in a lot of ways, organizing her entire existence around this relationship. I remember trying to talk to her about it once. We were home for winter break, probably around the time I was a junior in college. She was a freshman, bursting with college confidence and first love certainty. "Are you sure you want to turn down that internship?" I asked her carefully. "That's a really big opportunity." "Marcus and I want to spend the summer together," she said simply. "The internship will be there next year, or there will be other internships, but this time with him is now. You wouldn't understand. You've never been in a serious relationship." She was right. I hadn't been. I'd had a couple of dating experiences, but nothing that stuck. Nothing that felt like the all-consuming certainty that Emma had with Marcus. I'd been too focused on school and work and responsibility. Emma had made different choices, and I remember thinking that maybe she was right. Maybe I was the one doing it wrong. Fast forward to the spring of her junior year in college, my first year out, working a job in marketing that I hated, living in an apartment by myself, trying to figure out what my life was supposed to look like. That's when Marcus left her. Not over the phone, not in a text. He did it in person, which I guess was supposed to be the classy way to do it, but somehow made it worse. He came to her apartment, they went for a walk, and he told her that he'd met someone else. Someone at his internship the previous summer. Someone he realized he was more compatible with. He'd been thinking about it for months, he said. He just didn't know how to tell her. Months. He'd known for months while Emma was still making plans around him, while she was still telling our mother about their future, while she was still, in her mind, building a life with him. I found out because my mom called me crying. Actually crying, in a way I'd rarely heard her cry. She told me what had happened, and she said, "Emma is devastated. I don't know what to do. I've never seen her like this. Can you call her?" So I did. And my sister, who'd always been so confident and put together, was a complete mess. She wasn't eating. She wasn't going to class. She spent entire days in bed, staring at her phone, waiting for Marcus to text her back with an explanation that would make sense, with a reason that meant this wasn't real. And where I'd been working a job that demanded my presence from 9 to 5, where I'd been trying to build my own life, I suddenly became her emotional support system. I called her every day. I listened to her repeat the same questions over and over. Why didn't he love her? What was wrong with her? How could he have lied to her for months? I drove up to see her on weekends. I sat with her in her apartment while she cried. I ordered food that she didn't eat. I suggested therapists and yoga classes and meditation apps. I was the big sister, the capable one, the one who would fix this. And our parents. They spiraled into crisis mode in a way I'd never seen before. My mom was consumed with worry about Emma. My dad was angry. Angry at Marcus, angry at men in general, angry at the world for hurting his daughter. They called her multiple times a day. My mom drove up to see her. They talked about her transferring colleges if she needed to, about taking a semester off if she needed mental health support, about whatever it took to help Emma through this, which was all very reasonable and caring and the right thing to do. Emma needed support. She was going through a trauma. But I was also going through something. I was adjusting to my first real job. I was figuring out how to live alone and pay bills and be an adult. I was struggling with anxiety about whether I'd made the right career choice. I was lonely. I was overwhelmed. And I was also now the person holding my sister together while our parents focused entirely on her crisis. I never told any of them that I was struggling. I never called my mom crying about how hard I was finding adult life. I never asked my dad for advice about whether I should stay in my job or look for something else. I just handled it. Because that's what I did. That's who I was. Emma eventually pulled herself together. With therapy, with time, with the support of my parents and me, she started to heal. By the time I graduated the following year, she was dating someone new. She was back on track at school. She was, once again, the golden girl, the one with everything ahead of her. But here's what I realize now. That entire crisis was about the fact that my sister had built her identity around being in a relationship. That she'd made her entire life about someone else. And when he left, she had nothing else to anchor her. And the fact that our entire family had rallied around helping her fix that problem meant that she never actually had to learn the hard lesson, which is that sometimes you have to be enough for yourself. Meanwhile, I'd been learning that lesson my whole life. I'd learned that I had to be enough for myself, that nobody was going to show up and rescue me, that I had to be the strong one, the capable one, the one who didn't need anything from anyone. And I didn't know it yet, but that difference in our lessons, the ones we'd learned from our parents' choices, was about to become impossibly important. My graduation day was the beginning of May. Emma's crisis happened in the middle of May. Within 3 weeks of that phone call where my parents told me they couldn't attend my graduation because Emma needed them, I learned that my sister had gotten back together with Marcus. Yes, Marcus. The same Marcus who'd cheated on her, lied to her for months, and then broke her heart. 3 weeks of her crying and devastation, and suddenly he was texting her, saying he'd made a mistake, that the other girl meant nothing, that Emma was the one he really loved. And Emma, battered and vulnerable and desperate to believe that her pain had meant something, that it was part of a love story rather than just a tragedy, took him back. I remember my mom calling me to tell me. I was at work. This was the job I hated, by the way, the one I was trying to figure out how to get out of while also being too scared to actually leave, because leaving meant acknowledging that I'd made a mistake, and I wasn't allowed to make mistakes. I was supposed to have it all figured out. Emma and Marcus got back together, my mom said, and there was excitement in her voice, relief, like a tragedy had been averted. He realized what he had. He came back. Isn't that wonderful? That's great, I said, because that's what you say. That's what the good daughter says. But inside I was thinking, no, it's not great. It's terrible. He cheated on her, he lied to her, and now she's taking him back. And everyone's celebrating it like it's a love story. But I didn't say that. I never said it. Not to my mom, not to my dad, not to Emma herself. Because who was I to question my sister's relationship? Who was I to judge? I'd never been in love. I'd never been hurt like that. Maybe Marcus was worth taking back. Maybe I was just cynical. Looking back, I think that's when I started to pull away from my family. Not consciously. It wasn't a decision I made. It was more like a slow erosion, a gradual stepping back. I started having less availability when they called. I made plans on the weekends so I couldn't drive up and visit. I got busy with work and with making new friends and with trying to build a life that didn't revolve around being the responsible one. My parents didn't fight me on it. In fact, I think they barely noticed. They were occupied with Emma and her relationship saga, with watching to make sure Marcus didn't hurt her again, with being invested in her world in a way that took up all their emotional bandwidth. And I was fine with that. I told myself I was fine with that. I was an adult now. I didn't need my parents. I was perfectly capable of figuring things out on my own. Except I wasn't fine. I was angry. And I didn't know what to do with the anger because anger didn't fit into the narrative of who I was. The responsible one didn't get angry. The strong one didn't resent her family for not showing up. The good daughter didn't feel betrayed. So I did what I'd learned to do. I pushed it down and moved forward. I quit my marketing job about 4 months after graduation. I didn't have another job lined up, which was terrifying and irresponsible and not something the old me would have done. But the old me was cracking, and something new was starting to emerge. Something that was tired of being small, tired of being easy, tired of taking care of everyone else. I took some time to think about what I actually wanted to do. And what I wanted, I realized, was to work for myself. I'd always been good with money, good with planning, good with seeing how systems could be optimized. And I started thinking about starting my own business. It was a ridiculous idea. I had no business experience. I had minimal savings. I had a family that would probably not support the decision. But I also realized that I'd spent my whole life doing what was expected of me. And where had it gotten me? It had gotten me a graduation ceremony with no parents. It had gotten me a job I hated. It had gotten me to a place where I was so focused on being strong and independent that I'd forgotten how to ask for help, how to want things, how to let anyone in. So I decided to want something, really want it. Not in the careful, calculated way I wanted things before, but in the scary, all-in kind of way. I talked to my parents about my idea. I remember calling them one Sunday afternoon, probably expecting them to talk me out of it, to remind me that this was reckless and irresponsible. My dad said, "That sounds interesting, honey. Are you sure you have enough money saved up?" My mom said, "Well, you've always been so responsible. If anyone can make it work, it's you." And that was it. No real engagement. No, let's talk about this, or we believe in you, or we'll help you figure this out. Just a passing acknowledgement. And then we moved on to talking about Emma, who was struggling with something related to her relationship, or her classes, or her mental health. There was always something with Emma, and I understood in that moment that I was on my own, not in a tragic way, not in a way that meant my parents didn't love me, but in a way that was very, very clear. I could not count on them to be my cheerleaders or my safety net or my emotional support. They had other priorities, and I needed to be okay with that. So I was, or at least I decided to be. I started my business in a small office space that I shared with two other entrepreneurs. I was consulting, helping small businesses optimize their operations, automate their processes, reduce waste. It was exactly the kind of work I was good at. Systems, organization, making chaos into order. The first year was brutal. I was working 60-hour weeks. I was barely making enough to cover my office space and my apartment rent. I was eating ramen and going to thrift stores for clothes and putting every extra penny back into the business. I was also, for the first time in my life, completely focused on myself, on building something that was mine, on succeeding on my own terms, without needing anyone else to validate me or support me or show up for me. It was lonely, but it was also clarifying. I started to understand that the thing I'd learned from my family, that my value came from being useful to other people, was a prison, and I was starting to figure out how to break out of it. Emma, meanwhile, was still with Marcus. They were getting serious. They were talking about moving in together after college, about getting engaged, about their whole future. My mom was obsessed with it. She was already planning their wedding. She was already thinking about grandbabies. And I was thinking about revenue streams and client acquisition and whether I could make it another 6 months on savings. That was the landscape when my sister made her next big decision, the one that would, ultimately, set everything in motion for what was about to happen. Emma got engaged in the spring of what would have been my second year out of college. Marcus proposed at a fancy restaurant with a diamond ring that he'd clearly spent a lot of money on. Emma called my mom screaming with joy. My mom called me. I said congratulations. I meant it, sort of. Or at least, I meant that I hoped my sister would be happy. I just also hoped that she wouldn't make the same mistake again, which was giving up on herself for someone else. The wedding was set for the following June. A big wedding. A huge wedding. The kind of wedding my mom had probably been dreaming about since Emma was a little girl. And planning a wedding, as it turns out, requires a tremendous amount of time and attention and family involvement. My mom called me constantly with questions about my opinion on flowers and dress styles and venue choices. I gave my opinion when she asked, but I also tried to keep boundaries. I was in a critical phase with my business. I was trying to land some big contracts. I didn't have the bandwidth to be emotionally invested in wedding planning the way my mom needed someone to be. Emma, on the other hand, was completely consumed by it. This was her dream. This was her big event. She was going to have the perfect wedding because she was going to have the perfect marriage and the perfect life. She was completely sure of it. Here's what nobody told her. That certainty is usually a sign that you're not paying attention. About 3 months before the wedding, Marcus got drunk at a work happy hour and did something with someone he shouldn't have. Nothing full-on infidelity, not like the thing he'd done before, but something close enough that when his coworker, who was friends with a friend of Emma's, mentioned it casually at a party, it got back to Emma that Marcus had been inappropriate with someone. I found out because Emma called me, and she was devastated again, completely destroyed. Not in the quiet, internal way that I would have been destroyed. In the loud, dramatic, falling apart way that Emma got destroyed. And she wanted to know what to do, and she wanted my opinion, and she wanted my support. "What do you want to do?" I asked her. "I don't know," she said. "I love him. I'm supposed to marry him in 3 months. I can't just not marry him. But he disrespected me. How can I trust him? How can I marry someone I can't trust?" I thought about saying, "Don't marry him. You don't have to marry him just because you've already planned it. It's okay to change your mind." I thought about telling her that she had other options, that she could call off the wedding, that the world wouldn't end if she did. But that's not what my family did with crises. My family went into protection mode. They helped fix the problem. So I asked, "What does Marcus say?" He says he made a mistake. He says he was drunk and stupid and it didn't mean anything. He says he loves me and he wants to marry me, and he'll spend the rest of his life making sure I never doubt him again. And Emma wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe that this was a bump in the road, that love could overcome this, that her wedding fairy tale wasn't over. I called my mom and told her what was going on. My mom had a complete meltdown. Not about Emma's heartbreak, but about the wedding that she'd already planned. The wedding that 300 people had been invited to. The wedding that she'd been bragging about to all her friends. "We're not canceling the wedding," my mom said firmly. "Emma loves Marcus. They're going through a rough patch, but they'll get through it. People have rough patches before they get married. It's normal." "Maybe she needs to think about whether she really wants to marry him," I suggested carefully. "Of course she wants to marry him," my mom said, like I was crazy. "She's loved him since she was 18 years old. This is her person." And that was the end of the conversation. The wedding was happening. Emma and Marcus were getting counseling to work through this. Everything was fine. Everything was going to be fine. So Emma married Marcus anyway. And I stood in the church as a bridesmaid, wearing a dress I didn't pick out, and a smile I had to force, watching my sister make a choice that I suspected she was going to regret, while my parents beamed in the front row like they were the proudest people in the world. The reception was beautiful. There was a string quartet. There were those little sandwiches and champagne and a 4-tier cake. Emma looked radiant. Marcus looked relieved. My parents looked vindicated, like their faith in their daughter had been proven right. I got drunk at that reception. Not like a little tipsy, like legitimately drunk. Because I was so angry, and I didn't know what to do with it, so I channeled it into wine. My mom asked me at one point if I was okay. "I'm fine," I said, "just celebrating." But I wasn't fine. I was watching my sister throw her life away, and I was watching my parents enable it, and I was standing on the outside of it all, unable to make them see what I could see, which is that this wasn't a love story. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. And I was also acutely aware, in that moment, that nobody was going to show up for Emma the way they thought they would. Because what I'd learned from my own life is that you can't count on anyone to save you. You can only save yourself. Emma didn't learn that lesson. She was still waiting for her prince to be perfect, still believing in the fairy tale, still putting all of her faith in someone else. And I was learning the opposite lesson, that the only person you can truly count on is yourself. After Emma's wedding, I didn't go home for a long time. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't go home for Christmas. I didn't go home for Easter. I made excuses. Work was demanding. My business was critical during certain seasons. I had projects that couldn't wait. All of that was technically true. My business was growing. I was starting to land bigger clients. I was finally, after 2 years, starting to make real money. But there was more to it than that. I didn't want to be home. I didn't want to see my family and feel that familiar weight of obligation and responsibility, and the sense that I was never quite going to be as important as Emma. My mom would call periodically. "When are you going to come visit?" she'd ask. "Your dad misses you. Emma misses you." "Soon," I'd say. Let me get through this project. But I didn't want to go. And they didn't push very hard. They were occupied with their own lives. Emma was apparently not happy with Marcus. I heard pieces of this through my mom's carefully couched comments about marriage being harder than she expected and working through some communication issues. My dad was dealing with some health stuff. My mom was dealing with aging parents. They had their own problems. So we existed in this strange space where we were still a family, but we weren't really connected anymore. I was building my life 3 hours away. Emma was living hers. My parents were managing their own challenges, and we were all just separate. During those 2 years, my business really took off. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying it because I need you to understand the correlation between me stepping back from my family and me actually succeeding. When I stopped trying to be useful to everyone else, I suddenly had the capacity to be useful to myself. When I stopped trying to take care of my family, I suddenly had the energy to take care of my business. I went from barely making rent to hiring my first employee, then my second. I moved to a nicer office. I stopped eating ramen. I paid off my student loans. I started saving for a down payment on a house. I was, in every way that mattered financially, becoming successful. But emotionally, I was also becoming isolated. I was so focused on work, so determined to prove that I didn't need my family, so intent on building something that was entirely mine, that I didn't make room for much else. I dated someone for a while, but it didn't work out because I couldn't let him in. I wasn't comfortable with the vulnerability of it. I made a few friends through work, but I kept them at arm's length. I was successful and alone, and I told myself that was fine. I told myself that this was the trade-off. You could have achievement, or you could have connection, but you couldn't really have both. And I'd chosen achievement. Then, during the 3rd year after my graduation, I finally went home for Christmas. I honestly don't know why I did it. Some combination of missing my parents and feeling guilty for not visiting, and just being tired of holding on to anger. My mom had called and directly asked if I could come, and something in her voice made me say yes instead of giving the usual excuse. I should have paid attention to the sound of her voice. When I got home, I immediately knew something was very wrong. My house, the house I'd grown up in, looked the same on the outside. But when my mom opened the door, she looked smaller, like she'd shrunk. And my dad, when I saw him, looked tired in a way that went deeper than just being tired from a long day. "What's going on?" I asked. They exchanged a look, that look that parents give each other when they're about to deliver bad news. "Let's sit down," my mom said. Emma had left Marcus. She'd packed a bag and moved into an apartment on the other side of the state with a girlfriend and filed for divorce. This had happened 2 weeks earlier. Marcus was contesting the divorce. He was saying she was unstable and unreasonable. He was threatening to fight her on everything. And Emma, who'd finally woken up to the fact that she'd built her entire life around someone who didn't deserve her, was falling apart. My parents had been spending their time and energy supporting Emma through this. They'd helped her find an apartment. They'd helped her hire a lawyer. They were calling her multiple times a day. They were sending her money. "She's really struggling," my mom said, and I could hear how exhausted she was. "We're worried about her. She's not eating. She's barely sleeping. She made such a big mistake with Marcus, and now she's paying for it." I listened to this, and I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy, exactly, but a kind of understanding. Emma, for the first time in her life, was having to face the consequences of her own choices. She'd made a decision to marry someone who wasn't good for her, and that decision had imploded, and now she was having to deal with the fallout. And my parents, in trying to protect her from that consequence, were actually preventing her from learning the things she most needed to learn, that she was capable of surviving on her own. But I didn't say that to my mom. Instead, I asked, "What does Emma need?" "She needs to know that we're there for her," my mom said. I nodded. And then I asked, "Is Dad okay?" Because I'd noticed that my dad hadn't said much since I'd gotten home, and there was something in his demeanor that suggested this wasn't just about Emma's crisis. My parents exchanged another look. And that's when they told me about my dad's health. He'd been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease. He had to make lifestyle changes: diet, exercise, stress reduction. The doctor had told him that the next 5 years were critical, that he needed to take this seriously. "I'm going to be fine," my dad said in that way that men do when they're actually worried, but they're trying not to pass that worry on to their families. "But I need to make some changes." And I realized in that moment that my parents were aging, that they weren't going to live forever, that the time I had with them was finite, and that I'd spent the last 3 years not being in their lives, not calling them, not visiting them, not letting them be part of my success. I was angry about my graduation day. That was still true. But my parents weren't going to live forever, and I was going to spend the time I had with them being angry, or I was going to let it go. I didn't make a big dramatic decision about it. I didn't apologize for my absence. I just decided in that moment to be present for the rest of Christmas. And I asked about Emma. After Emma's wedding, I didn't go home for a long time. I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I didn't go home for Christmas. I didn't go home for Easter. I made excuses. Work was demanding. My business was critical during certain seasons. I had projects that couldn't wait. All of that was technically true. My business was growing. I was starting to land bigger clients. I was finally, after 2 years, starting to make real money. But there was more to it than that. I didn't want to be home. I didn't want to see my family and feel that familiar weight of obligation and responsibility and the sense that I was never quite going to be as important as Emma. My mom would call periodically. "When are you going to come visit?" she'd ask. "Your dad misses you. Emma misses you." "Soon," I'd say. "Let me get through this project." But I didn't want to go, and they didn't push very hard. They were occupied with their own lives. Emma was apparently not happy with Marcus. I heard pieces of this through my mom's carefully couched comments about marriage being harder than she expected and working through some communication issues. My dad was dealing with some health stuff. My mom was dealing with aging parents. They had their own problems. So we existed in this strange space where we were still a family, but we weren't really connected anymore. I was building my life 3 hours away. Emma was living hers. My parents were managing their own challenges, and we were all just separate. During those 2 years, my business really took off. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying it because I need you to understand the correlation between me stepping back from my family and me actually succeeding. When I stopped trying to be useful to everyone else, I suddenly had the capacity to be useful to myself. When I stopped trying to take care of my family, I suddenly had the energy to take care of my business. I went from barely making rent to hiring my first employee, then my second. I moved to a nicer office. I stopped eating ramen. I paid off my student loans. I started saving for a down payment on a house. I was, in every way that mattered financially, becoming successful. But emotionally, I was also becoming isolated. I was so focused on work, so determined to prove that I didn't need my family, so intent on building something that was entirely mine, that I didn't make room for much else. I dated someone for a while, but it didn't work out because I couldn't let him in. I wasn't comfortable with the vulnerability of it. I made a few friends through work, but I kept them at arm's length. I was successful and alone, and I told myself that was fine. I told myself that this was the trade-off. You could have achievement or you could have connection, but you couldn't really have both. And I'd chosen achievement. Then, during the 3rd year after my graduation, I finally went home for Christmas. I honestly don't know why I did it. Some combination of missing my parents and feeling guilty for not visiting and just being tired of holding on to anger. My mom had called and directly asked if I could come, and something in her voice made me say yes instead of giving the usual excuse. I should have paid attention to the sound of her voice. When I got home, I immediately knew something was very wrong. My house, the house I'd grown up in, looked the same on the outside. But when my mom opened the door, she looked smaller, like she'd shrunk. And my dad, when I saw him, looked tired in a way that went deeper than just being tired from a long day. "What's going on?" I asked. They exchanged a look, that look that parents give each other when they're about to deliver bad news. "Let's sit down," my mom said. Emma had left Marcus. She'd packed a bag and moved into an apartment on the other side of the state with a girlfriend and filed for divorce. This had happened 2 weeks earlier. Marcus was contesting the divorce. He was saying she was unstable and unreasonable. He was threatening to fight her on everything. And Emma, who'd finally woken up to the fact that she'd built her entire life around someone who didn't deserve her, was falling apart. My parents had been spending their time and energy supporting Emma through this. They'd helped her find an apartment. They'd helped her hire a lawyer. They were calling her multiple times a day. They were sending her money. "She's really struggling," my mom said, and I could hear how exhausted she was. "We're worried about her. She's not eating. She's barely sleeping. She made such a big mistake with Marcus, and now she's paying for it." I listened to this, and I felt something shift inside me. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of understanding. Emma, for the first time in her life, was having to face the consequences of her own choices. She'd made a decision to marry someone who wasn't good for her, and that decision had imploded, and now she was having to deal with the fallout. And my parents, in trying to protect her from that consequence, were actually preventing her from learning the thing she most needed to learn, that she was capable of surviving on her own. But I didn't say that to my mom. Instead, I asked, "What does Emma need?" "She needs to know that we're there for her," my mom said. I nodded, and then I asked, "Is Dad okay?" Because I'd noticed that my dad hadn't said much since I'd gotten home, and there was something in his demeanor that suggested this wasn't just about Emma's crisis. My parents exchanged another look, and that's when they told me about my dad's health. He'd been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease. He had to make lifestyle changes: diet, exercise, stress reduction. The doctor had told him that the next 5 years were critical, that he needed to take this seriously. "I'm going to be fine," my dad said in that way that men do when they're actually worried, but they're trying not to pass that worry on to their families. "But I need to make some changes." And I realized in that moment that my parents were aging, that after that Christmas, things changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but they changed. I started visiting my parents more regularly, not out of obligation, but out of genuine desire to be in their lives. I called my mom and we talked, really talked, not just exchanged pleasantries. I helped my dad with his health journey, learning about heart-healthy cooking and going for walks with him. And I watched Emma rebuild her life. She got the divorce finalized. She found a job. She moved to her own apartment instead of living with a roommate. Slowly, piece by piece, she built a life that was entirely hers. Not following a man, not fulfilling someone else's dream. Just her own life, built by her own hands. She was still struggling sometimes. There were still moments where she'd call crying because she was lonely or scared or doubting herself. But she was also getting stronger. She was learning that she was capable of more than she thought. And here's the thing, watching her do that, watching her become someone who could stand on her own, made me realize something about what I'd been doing. I'd been judging her for being dependent, but what I'd actually done was reject connection entirely. I'd told myself that I was strong and independent, but really what I was afraid. Afraid of letting people in, afraid of being disappointed, afraid of being overlooked again. So the summer after Christmas, I made a decision. I was going to try to have a different kind of relationship with my family. Not one based on them taking care of me or me taking care of them, but one based on genuine connection. And I was going to try to open myself up in my personal life in a way I hadn't before. It wasn't easy. I'd spent 3 years building walls. I'd spent a lot of time learning how to be alone. Opening up again meant risking being hurt. It meant being vulnerable in a way that I'd been trained to think was weakness. But I did it. I went to therapy and I talked about my family and my fears and the way I'd learned to navigate the world. I started dating again, and this time I let someone actually get to know me. I opened up to my friends. I became less of a robot and more of an actual person. and my business kept growing. Because here's the secret that nobody tells you. You don't have to choose between success and connection. You can have both. It's just harder. It requires more vulnerability. It requires being willing to ask for help. It requires being honest about your limitations. This was the point we were at, approximately 4 years after my graduation, when something happened. A friend from college reached out to me on LinkedIn. Her name was Jennifer, and we'd been friendly but not close. She was working for a venture capital firm that was looking for new companies to invest in. She asked if I'd be interested in talking about my business. I said yes, somewhat skeptically. I'd never thought of myself as the kind of person who'd get VC funding. I was just running a solid, profitable business with my small team. I wasn't trying to change the world or scale exponentially or any of those startup fantasies. But Jennifer insisted. She came to my office. She looked at my financials, my processes, my client list, and she said, "This is incredible. You've built something really special. Why aren't you scaling this?" And I realized that I'd gotten comfortable. My business was making good money. I was paying myself a solid salary. I had employees who I cared about and who did good work. It was sustainable and it was good, but it could be more. So I took the VC funding. Not a huge amount, enough to hire more people, expand to other cities, build out infrastructure. And I did what I'd gotten very good at doing. I built something bigger. Within a year, my business had tripled in size. I had 20 employees instead of 5. I'd opened an office in 3 different cities. We were doing work for larger clients with bigger budgets. I was making significantly more money than I'd ever dreamed. And during all of this, I was also more present in my life. I was dating someone I cared about. I was close with my parents again. I was helping Emma as she navigated starting her own career. I was doing the work and also living the life. It was around this time, about 5 years after my graduation, that I ran into my parents at a coffee shop. I was meeting with a client. My parents were running errands. We said hello. My mom introduced me to the friend she was with, and she said so proudly, "This is my daughter Sarah. She runs her own business. She's so successful." And the friend said the things people say. "That's wonderful. How long have you been doing that?" And my mom said, "She started right after college. We weren't sure it was going to work, but she believed in herself and she just kept going. We're so proud of her." And I listened to my mom tell this woman about me, and I realized something. My parents were proud of me. They'd always been proud of me. Even when they made that choice to skip my graduation, even when they weren't showing up the way I needed them to, even when I thought I was invisible to them, they were proud of me. That didn't erase the hurt, but it contextualized it. It made it something that had happened, rather than something that defined our relationship. They weren't going to live forever. That the time I had with them was finite. And that I'd spent the last 3 years not being in their lives, not calling them, not visiting them, not letting them be part of my success. I was angry about my graduation day. That was still true. But my parents weren't going to live forever, and I was going to spend the time I had with them being angry, or I was going to let it go. I didn't make a big dramatic decision about it. I didn't apologize for my absence. I just decided, in that moment, to be present for the rest of Christmas. And I asked about Emma. 5.5 years after my graduation, my parents threw a party. It was a milestone anniversary for their wedding, 35 years together. They wanted to celebrate with close family and friends. They asked if I would come. They asked if I would bring my boyfriend, whose name is David, and who I'd been dating for 2 years, and who makes me feel like I'm a full person worthy of being loved. I said yes, and I brought David, and I was genuinely happy to be there. The party was at a country club. There was catering and a band. My parents had invited maybe 50 people, family, close friends, longtime neighbors. Emma was there with her new partner, a woman named Jessica, who treated her with genuine kindness and respect. My extended family was there. It was the kind of nice, normal family celebration that happens all the time. And somewhere during the evening, my dad got up to give a speech. He talked about my mom, about their journey together, about the kids they'd raised and the life they'd built. And then he said something that I wasn't expecting. When Sarah was a young person, he said, she was the kind of daughter who made parenting easy. She was responsible and capable, and she never caused us stress. And I think, looking back, we got complacent. We assumed she didn't need as much from us because she was so good at taking care of herself. And then there was a time when she was transitioning into adulthood, when we made some choices as a family that I think weren't in her best interest. And I've spent the last 5 years realizing the weight of that. I felt tears start running down my face. David put his hand on my back. Sarah, my dad continued, looking directly at me, I want to apologize for not being there when you needed us, for assuming that your strength meant you didn't need support. And I want to say thank you for forgiving us, for understanding that we were doing the best we could, and for coming back into our lives. The room was quiet, and then people started clapping, and I was crying, and my mom was crying, and Emma was crying, and it was like something heavy that I'd been carrying for 5 years just lifted. After the speech, my dad came and hugged me, really hugged me, and he said quietly, I see you now, Sarah. I want you to know that I see you, and I'm sorry it took me this long. And I said, thank you. Because what else could I say? The moment had passed. The hurt had happened. But my dad was acknowledging it, and that mattered. Later in the evening, Emma pulled me aside. I wanted to tell you something, she said, and I wanted to tell you privately because I don't want to make it about me. What is it? I asked. I'm going back to school, she said. I'm enrolling in a graduate program in social work. I want to work with families. I want to help people navigate the complicated stuff that I went through. And I realized in that moment that my sister was turning her pain into purpose, that she was taking the thing that had broken her dependence on someone else, and she was transforming it into something that was going to help other people. That's incredible, I said. I wouldn't have done it without you, she said. Watching what you did, watching you build something on your own, it taught me that I could do that too. That being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. That independence and connection aren't mutually exclusive. 6 years after my graduation, 6 years after that phone call where my parents told me they couldn't attend, I got a new job opportunity. A larger company wanted to acquire my business. They wanted me to come on as the VP of operations and help them build what I'd built. It was a significant amount of money. It was also a significant step in my career. It would mean I'd no longer be running my own show, but I'd also no longer be responsible for everything. I could be part of a team. I could have some boundaries. I talked about it with David. We talked about what it would mean for our future, our relationship, our life. I talked about it with my therapist. And then I talked about it with my parents. We were having dinner at my apartment. Me, David, my parents, just us. And I told them about the offer. I asked them what they thought. My mom said, "What do you want to do?" And that question, in a way, encompassed everything. She wasn't telling me what would be best for the family. She wasn't saying that I should stay independent, or that I should give up my business, or that I should do anything other than what I actually wanted to do. I think I want to do it, I said. I think I've proven that I can build something. And I think the next thing I need to learn is how to collaborate, how to be part of something bigger than just me. My dad said, "That sounds like the right move to me." And then my mom said something else. "I've been thinking a lot about your graduation day." Here we go, I thought. This is it. I've been thinking about how, if I could go back and make a different choice, I would, she continued. I would go to your graduation. I would find someone else to help Emma, or I'd help her in a different way, but I would go to your graduation, and I want you to know that. I know, I said, and I did know. After 6 years, I knew it. But I've also been thinking about what happened after, my mom said. How you pulled away from us. And I realized that while my choice affected you, Your choice to not come home, to not let us back in, that also came from you. And I'm not saying that as a blame. I'm just saying you had to process that hurt the way you had to process it. And I'm grateful that you came back. And she was right. Both things could be true. My parents' choice to skip my graduation was real, and my choice to withdraw from them for 3 years was also real. The hurt had happened, but so had the healing. And now we were on the other side of it. That night, after my parents left, I sat on my couch with David, and I said, "I've been thinking about something." "What?" he asked. "I want to do something for myself," I said. And I know that sounds weird, because I've spent the last 6 years doing things for myself, but I mean something different, something that's not about proving anything to anyone, not about proving to my parents that I'm strong, not about proving to myself that I don't need anyone, but just about doing something because I want to do it. "Like what?" he asked. "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm going to figure it out." It's been 8 years now since that phone call on my graduation day. 8 years since my parents told me they couldn't attend because they needed to be with Emma. 8 years since I felt, for the first time in my life, like I was truly invisible to the people I loved. I'm 27 now. I'm VP of operations at a company that I actually really like working for. David and I are engaged. We're getting married next spring. Emma is finishing her master's degree and working as an intern at a family counseling center. My dad's heart is doing well. My mom is thriving. And I've had a lot of time to think about what that day meant, what it taught me, and what I've learned in the years since. Here's what I understand now. My parents didn't make their choice because they didn't love me. They made it because they were flawed human beings trying to navigate a complicated situation with limited tools and knowledge. They were doing what they thought was right. Were they wrong? Yeah, probably. But not because they were bad parents, because they were human parents, and human parents make mistakes. And here's the thing about my response. My withdrawal from my family, my decision to become completely self-sufficient, my belief that I didn't need anyone, that wasn't strength. It was protection. It was a very smart protection mechanism that kept me from being hurt the way I'd been hurt. But it also kept me from being close to anyone. I had to learn, over the course of 8 years, that independence and connection are not the same thing. That you can be strong and also need people. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That asking for help doesn't erase your accomplishments. And I had to learn that my sister Emma, who I'd initially judged for being dependent, was actually navigating a different challenge. She had to learn how to stand alone. I had to learn how to stand with others while still standing for myself. We both had to learn the same thing, just from different sides. Here's what I wish I could tell that 19-year-old girl who stood in her dorm room wearing a graduation gown, feeling completely invisible. Your pain is real. Your hurt matters. And you're going to spend the next 8 years trying to prove that you don't need your parents, and you're going to fail, because ultimately, we all need connection. We all need to know that we matter to someone. That's not a weakness. That's just being human. And I wish I could tell my parents, showing up matters. It matters even if your daughter is strong enough to handle it without you. She's strong because she's had to be. Give her permission to be soft sometimes. Give her permission to need you. But I can't go back. I can only tell you this. If you're watching this and you're thinking about your own graduation, or your own moment of being overlooked, or your own time of feeling invisible, it doesn't define you. Not unless you let it. I made a choice to let that moment define me for 6 years. I let it tell me that I was only valuable if I was useful, only worthy of love if I was strong enough not to need anything from anyone. And it took years to undo that belief. Years of therapy and vulnerability and letting people in and learning that I was enough, not because of what I could do, but because I existed. And here's the beautiful thing. On the other side of that, I found that my actual accomplishments mean more, because I'm not doing them to prove anything anymore. I'm doing them because I want to, because they matter to me, because I get to choose what success looks like. And my relationships mean more, because I'm not in them out of obligation or desperation. I'm in them because I choose to be, because the people I love matter to me and I matter to them, and that's worth showing up for. The funny thing is, I thought that the whole point of this story was going to be about revenge. I was going to show my parents what I'd accomplished, and they were going to realize that they'd made a mistake, and it was going to be this triumphant moment where I proved them wrong for underestimating me. But that's not what happened. What happened was much quieter. It was my dad giving a speech at his anniversary party and acknowledging his mistake. It was my mom asking me what I actually wanted instead of telling me what I should do. It was me accepting their apology and also understanding their humanity. There's no revenge in this story. There's no villain who got what he deserved. There's no dramatic courtroom scene or public humiliation. There's just a family that got hurt and took years to heal and eventually found their way back to each other. But different, better, more honest. And maybe that's the real revenge, if you want to call it that. Not hurting the people who hurt you, but becoming someone so full and so complete that you don't need their validation anymore. Becoming someone who can look at their mistakes with compassion instead of anger. Becoming someone who chose every single day to forgive. Because forgiveness isn't about letting them off the hook. It's about taking the hook out of your own heart. It's about deciding that you're not going to let their mistake be the thing that shapes your entire future. I did that. It took me a long time, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I did that. And now, on the other side of it, I'm getting married to someone I love. I'm doing work that fulfills me. I'm close with my family. I'm the kind of person who can stand alone if I have to, but I don't have to anymore. And that's better than any kind of revenge could ever be.